and my pronouns are he, him, his. I head diversity, equity, and inclusion at the LaLiT Suri Hospitality Group. On behalf of Keshav Suri Foundation, the LaLiT Suri Hospitality Group, and Pride Circle, I warmly welcome you all to Queering the Pitch, the Pink Economy Unveiled. And without further ado, I would now like to welcome our respected Chairperson and Managing Director, Dr. Jyotsna Suri, who has also been the past President FICCI, to do the welcome address.
Thank you very much, Akshay. And yes, Monday blues, but happy to see so many people here. So a very, very warm welcome to all of you for this Queering the Pitch, Unveiling the Pink Economy. I am truly delighted to be here and just want to give a brief introduction as to why we are here. We are here because we want to explore the influence and potential of the pink economy in shaping both business and societal landscapes. I'd like to mention here that, the pink economy is not just a concept, it's a movement. And a movement that recognizes the economic strength and cultural richness of the LGBTQI plus community. Through this event, what do we want to achieve? Through this event, we want to achieve and unveil the potential that is there within this economy and the opportunities that actually exist within the businesses and furthering and adding more to the GDP. This is a transformative journey, and I really welcome all of you to be part of it. I would quickly like to introduce some of the speakers that are here today and the moderator as well. We have Fabrice Houdat, Executive Director, Association of LGBTQI plus Corporate Director. We have Lee Badgett, Professor of Economics and UMass Amherst and Williams. He's a distinguished scholar research. Ms. Naina Lal Kidwai, Chairperson Rothschild and Company, Founder and Chairperson India Sanitation Coalition, past President FICCI and a dear friend of mine. Sri Ramaswamy, Co-Founder Pride Circle. And moderating this session is going to be Krishna Omkar, who I've seen after 30 years. You haven't changed a bit, Krishna. A warm welcome to all of you. And I'd really like to get this thing started. So, Krishna, may I request you to come up and take over? Thank you so much. Namaskar.
Morning, everyone, and thank you again for taking time. And as Ms. Suri said, it's Monday blues, but hopefully we can eradicate those Monday blues with some rainbow lights and color, right? So this is going to be, I think, quite an interactive discussion. And at the end of the discussion, we will put some questions to the panel from the audience. And I'm told that Lee has a copy of her book. So the best question from the audience will win a copy of Lee's book. So, well, I think maybe if it's an extra special question, she can sign it for you as well. So take notes and make sure that you get those questions ready. I know that we are tight on time, so we're going to just dive straight into it for a Monday morning. Let's start by setting the stage a little bit. And this is a question to everyone on the panel. Whoever wants to dive in first can dive in. But how would you explain diversity and inclusion to a 10-year-old? Lee, it looks like you have an answer.
Thank you. So Fabrice is the one with 10-year-old children, but yeah, I'm a big believer in the golden rule: do unto others as you want them to do to you. And kids get that. I mean, something kind of simple that is a lesson that I think many of us learn in different ways in different cultures, but that can last a lifetime. And we know that when kids are presented with diversity as just a natural fact, they are they are very eager to understand that and to believe that. So I think there's just some very simple lessons we can teach them.
And you know, Lee's right. I have two 10-year-old boys, and what really struck me when they were growing up is that at the beginning, they do not really see those differences, right? And so one of my sons, as an example, had a friend at school called Austin, and he would describe to me Austin, and then when I met Austin, Austin was black, and it never crossed the mind of my son to tell me first that Austin was black. He would say he has curly hair, he's tall. He would never say, the color of his skin was not what struck him as the biggest characteristic of who he was. And then similarly, they did not pay that much attention to gender. And then at some point, my son Ethan started telling my son Maxim, this is for girl. And there was a negative connotation to it. And that was because of socializing, right? Meaning that his natural instinct was to not see any negative connotation attached to gender until he went to school. And basically, he started to see in the books that men had more prominent roles in the books than women. And so I think, the reality about diversity and inclusion is that we're trying to come back to that stage in which we do not have negative connotation attached to differences.
So, and Nena, you want to make a point?
Well, only to say I endorse all the views, and I love your do unto others as you would do unto, or have done unto yourself. I just add that to that 10-year-old, to also say that you are an agent of change back at home, because so much of what a child brings to school is influenced by a generation that maybe doesn't think the way we would like them to. So to be able to stand up to family and society is not easy, but to let them feel and understand that they are the lightning rod of change.
I go next. So I would probably start with a box of crayons. Invoking a child in all of us, imagine the box of crayons. If it just were to have color red, and if you were to paint, the painting would just be red or one color, black or gray. And that sort of tells you that, we need to value different colors in the box of crayons. And you don't put them away, so that's a diversity for you. If you don't bring them together and paint it using all those colors, it won't be inclusion. The crayons would feel left out. So you need to bring the crayons, put it on the piece of paper, use all the colors, and make a beautiful painting. I think that's how I would explain this to 10-year-old.
Srini, I didn't know you were a poet as well, but there we go. I love it. We've always heard the Forrest Gump, life is a box of chocolates analogy, but I've never heard the life is a box of crayons analogy, so there we are. So let's just take that then to the next question, which is we're here, as Akshay said, we're here to talk about queering the pitch and the pink economy. Let's just set the frame a little bit. What is the pink economy? What are we talking about when we say that there is such a thing as economic empowerment of LGBTQ people? Now, Lee, you started your work actually working on racial equality and the wage gap in terms of race. But for those of you in the audience who don't know, Lee is also the person who really kind of pioneered the study of the wage gap for LGBTQ people and created a mechanism to be able to measure and quantify the impact. So perhaps you're the most best placed person to talk about this. But what do we mean when we talk about the pink economy?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's not like crayons where you have the box of pink crayons all off to the side, the pink economy. But it does mean that we want to think about LGBTI people as already being out there in various economic kinds of roles. So when we think about consumers, when we think about employees, workers, when we think about people who are investors, business owners, people who are working in the care economy, perhaps unpaid in homes. These are all people who might also be LGBT. And So why do we have to think about them as something different? No, it's because they bring to those roles something different, different kinds of experiences in life. Often those experiences are very tough ones and shape how people develop in terms of their health, the kinds of skills that they're able to acquire. And so there's I hate to start with the bad side, but there's kind of the exclusion aspect that's involved in shaping consumers and workers. But on the positive side, that creates an opportunity to think more carefully about how we want to include people in all of those different kinds of roles. And the effect of being more inclusive is that people have the ability to gain knowledge and skills and creativity when schools are open to LGBT people, the ability to turn some of these challenges that people face into what I like to call our LGBT superpowers. Increased empathy, ability to work with others, kind of understanding that golden rule at a very gut level, and being more fully accepted means the opportunity to gain from that knowledge and those skills and that creativity. So I think there are some real benefits to thinking about the pink economy and how to blend that into all the other colors of the rainbow and crayons, just to kind of continue that wonderful metaphor.
Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about what, in the corporate context, the pink economy means. And Ms. Kidwai, you have a unique experience in leading multinational financial institutions in this country. You've also been on the boards of multiple organizations, including globally, whether it's FMCG or financial or healthcare or insurance. So you've seen the corporate world from every possible leadership angle. What do you think is the role of corporates in advancing the cause of inclusion and empowerment, particularly for LGBTQ people?
I think the starting point has to be that the corporate has to fully embrace the idea that every idea, every thought, every part of the team needs to be represented in the thinking of the corporate. So this has to go beyond the tick box exercise of, do you do A, B, C, D? And we saw it in gender. We have moved forward in issues to do with gender, and that's been a good starting point for corporates in our country in particular. But the danger is it remains as a tick box exercise. Do you provide this? Do you, when you go out to interview, make sure that one of the panel members represents it's representative enough that it's all not just men looking in a particular way? Do you ensure that it's a safe place to work? Do you ensure that every idea has a voice and that you're not just tolerating it, you're embracing it? So the corporates that get it right are the ones that truly want every view, every opinion at the top table. And I saw that firsthand in that the team I first acquired, because it was already there, was very similar, male, from particular schools. And the thinking was so uniform that the meetings, you could almost tell what the answer was going to be. And then in the year and a half that we had embraced, it was primarily gender at the time, I'm now talking way back in 2006, the thoughts that came, and there were rejections of ideas, there was challenging of ideas, and what we got was so much more rich in terms of what we took back to the consumer, and the office itself had a buzz, which was far more embracing. These things don't happen easily in the corporate world. When you have these transitions, there are lots of undercurrents which need solving. People, every single individual has to embrace it. But we also have to run training programs to remind people about what is right behavior and wrong, what will be tolerated and what won't. And so from policy to execution, you need to continuously have refresh programs to ensure that people understand why the company wants it and needs it, but also what right behavior is and what will be tolerated and what won't. And it's this mix of policy, good and bad, and you bring it all together. And when it works, it's magic. So the key is to keep showcasing groups like the LaLiT who have been amazing across, whether it is people who have challenges or indeed the pink economy that lead the way and show the way. And I think the results show up for themselves. I'm sure that attrition is an issue which we all have. Race for talent, retaining good talent is a big issue in high growth economies such as ours. If we can get it right and retain all talent that comes to us and make sure that we are fishing in wide pools of talent, it's not just that provincial male sort of talent pool, but across it, so we get the best of what we need, we retain everything that we want to retain because we have the right culture, the right organization. And this is easier said than done, but it's going to be right from leadership down to the HR professionals that guide us in our organizations to make sure that it can happen. And I think the LaLiT Group, Jyotsna, what you are heading up is quite amazing and a great example for many to follow.
So there are two things that I'm taking away from that. One is there's an internal effect, so that's things like talent attraction and attrition. And then there's an external effect, which is what you talked about, which is going to the consumer with the right product and going to the consumer with the right outcome. So it's both internal and external. And Lee, I wonder if I could come back to you for a moment, and if you could talk to us a little bit about the cost of exclusion and the potential upside of getting inclusion right.
Yeah, there definitely are external effects that that occur from exclusion, and it really comes back down to what we call human capital in economics, which are those skills, that knowledge, that creativity, and that is central to the growth of economies as a whole and to individual businesses. And so, if we are holding people back by how we treat them in schools, so they don't fully develop their capabilities. In workplaces, so that they are not able to be fully productive, it will have harms at all of those levels, starting at the business level. It also makes it much harder to attract and retain talent overall when it's clear that diversity is not respected. And then we can add it up to the larger economic level. A project that I worked on at the World Bank with Fabrice a few years back, we actually tried to estimate what that cost would be to the Indian economy. And it was somewhere on the order, it was more than $1 billion a year. It was something on the order of 1% of GDP. And you can say, well, 1%, that's not very much. But really, if we suddenly woke up and GDP had dropped by 1%, we would be appalled. We would call it a recession. We would take action. What exclusion does is it puts our economy in kind of a permanent recession in a way. We're leaving opportunities on the table. And so it's something that's quite costly at both of those levels.
So now you mentioned you worked on a project with Fabrice at the World Bank. So Fabrice, let's talk to you for a bit. Can you, because you have very wide experience as well. So Fabrice worked at the World Bank, after which he worked at the UN, where he was a human rights officer, and he was behind the Free and Equal campaign and behind the UN standards of conduct for LGBTQ in business.
The LaLiT was one of the first company globally to express support.
Exactly.
Thank you, Keshav.
So, can you give me perhaps a couple of examples in your experience of companies like the LaLiT Group that were getting it right and were reaping the dividends of getting it right? Because I know we talk a lot about getting it wrong and the danger of getting it wrong, but let's talk about how you get it right and how whether you have any examples of that.
Well, so now I have a small non-profit which try to improve the representation of LGBTQ plus people on the corporate board. So you've been on the corporate board, you probably have noticed that there's not that many people that self-identify as LGBTQ plus. And you know, my main argument is to say, look, there's all these very talented LGBTQ plus entrepreneurs, CEO, CFO, CMOs that might not be on your radar screen because they live in a part of society that is slightly marginalized. Why don't you consider them for board roles? Yeah. But I have a secondary argument, which is to say those people might help you navigate what is a demographic revolution. And that's actually a term that my friend Lee Badgett coined and then I stole, which is that there is an LGBTQ plus demographic revolution. It's actually really striking. If you look at the United States, 7.1%, 7.2%, now it's pretty stable, of the American population self-identify as LGBTQ plus. So that's a gigantic pool of consumers. But then it goes beyond that, which is when you look at younger generation, that number start climbing tremendously. And at the beginning, even as a gay man, I felt that it sounded a little bit far-fetched, that up to 20% of young Americans, mostly driven by bisexuality and non-binary identities, self-identify as LGBTQ+. But as we get more and more of these surveys, including surveys by Ipsos that has been carried out in 30 countries, including pretty conservative countries like Turkey, it appears that there is something happening. So I happen to have a little advisory role with L'Oréal, you know, the French cosmetics company that is competing with Cyril's company. And so I have a bit of an advisory role to them. And last time that I went to Paris, I had to explain to the CEO what happened to controversies around Pride. You know, one very famously was Disney, and then the other one was another Bush. You know, I don't drink, but apparently people drink something called beer, and one of them is Bud Light, and there was a big controversy around it. So I came with my pitch, and I said, well, look, you know, young people have a very different relationship to gender and sexual orientation. And he stopped me after 5 minutes, and he said, listen, to me that's a no-brainer. You know, already, he said Saint Laurent, which is a very conservative brand, he says the figurehead of Saint Laurent is Troy Sivan, who's an openly gay artist in Australia, and Little Nas X, who I have never heard about, but apparently is a famous rapper. And he said, to me, it's a no-brainer. You know, the consumers that I want to acquire, which are Gen Z consumers, not because they have a lot of money, but because if they engage with my brand today, they're going to stay with my brand for a long period of time. He says, those consumers, they want to see non-binary and LGBT characters in my advertising. And that's the emotional attachment I need to have. So he said, you know, I get a little bit of hate mail, but he said, I don't care about this hate mail because those are not my consumers. And, you know, one of the things which is to me the most important about the board is that the board looks at what's going to happen in 20 years from now or 50 years from now. The board tries to position the company for the long term. And sometimes the board doesn't see what's happening, right? So as an example, you could think, to give you a geopolitical example, you know, Vladimir Putin started misbehaving in 2013, but Germany continued to, you know, become dependent on the energy resources of Russia, despite all of the signs that Russia was probably going to become a foe. And that's you know, an inability to project yourself in the future. Similarly, I've been harassing Srini and Lee to teach me about OpenAI, because I can see that this is changing everything that I'm doing, right? And that I have to acquire the skills if I want to stay in business for another 20 years before I can retire, or 30 years, depending on how I manage my money. So I'm saying that to say that there is something happening, and that it's, you know, our relationship to sexuality and our relationship to gender is changing, but it's very easy not to see it if you are only surrounded by people of your generation. And so I love what you said when you said, well, you know, those 10 years old have to come back at home and teach us about what's happening in the world, because there is definitely something that is changing.
So we're not going to talk about inclusion in AI, because that's a totally different. We're going to spend a whole day talking about that. But talk about diversity in the room. We have 2 gay Frenchmen in the room, right? That's exciting.
Most Frenchmen are gay. I haven't met a straight Frenchman in a very long time.
I don't think we're going to put that on the official record for today. Let's talk to Srini, because Srini, you have experience of creating really a space for corporate LGBTQI inclusion in India, and you've been at the forefront of that. What inspired you to found Pride Circle, and what does Pride Circle do in terms of the queer economy that we're talking about?
Oh, I could go in for days on that, so, but I'll keep it short. So I'll probably sort of start by saying that I took a very conscious decision after working in the corporate space for over 2 decades, leading the DEI office in brands like Cisco and Intuit, and that point of time I realized that if I go on working with one company, I could only change one company. We could not anticipate changing the entire ecosystem and social spaces. So hence, very consciously, I quit the corporate world in 2018. And even before that, I co-founded Pride Circle with my current business partner, Ram, who's not here. He's in spirit, but he's alive. It's been 6 very fruitful, I would say humbling experience for us, and I'll steal Lee's work on the economic loss, cost of exclusion in India, which was a study done in 2014, which said India loses up to 1.2% of gross domestic product, GDP. And I'll give you a few numbers so that it settles down. Our Prime Minister talks about making India a $5 trillion economy. The purchasing power of LGBT population globally is $5 trillion. When it comes to, you spoke about internal versus external. In the US, the LGBT people, the taxes they pay is $90 billion. Okay? Canada, 60 billion. Australia, 10 billion. And if we are talking about at a country level, that's the number that we are looking at. Now it comes to the workplaces, and we said that, how this reflects in workplaces, because if we don't have jobs, what kind of economic empowerment we are talking about? They're going to get excluded because of homophobia that they experience at school. And they're not going to contribute to either a company or the country. So we have to do something about it. I think that was the core idea behind setting Pride Circle. And we knew that we wanted to have a name which sort of really truly signifies what our mission and core values are, because we are building a circle of trust, circle of inclusion, circle of empathy, circle of fairness, and we do that with pride. So that's been our 6-year journey, and we've been very successful in enabling jobs, entrepreneurship, helping over 400 organizations to be more inclusive in their approaches, working with leaders across India. And from just 2 of us, and last point, I know we have a time, I'm keeping a time check. From we started Pride Circle in 2017, and I'll give you the number which also talks about the pink economy. 2017, we started the company. Ram and I, we quit our jobs a month after the ruling down of Section 377. So it's not that because it happened, we quit. We knew that we wanted to do this for a very long time. And within 6 months of the ruling down of 377, we came up with country's first LGBT job fair. Thank you, Keshav, for that. We did the first ever in LaLiT, Bangalore. And we were able to have over 40 companies putting up the rainbow booths and hiring people. We had over 1,200 job seekers, and we were able to enable 65 jobs. 2019, and it's been 5 years, and I say this, I get goosebumps. And we've been able to enable over 1,000 jobs. And imagine these individuals not only contribute to the economy, but also the people around them creating that avenue. So that's something that, I would probably talk about other points in a bit, but that's the kind of contribution we are looking at, and that's what the value that we are adding to our queer community to scale and grow.
Thank you, Srini. I'll pose this question across the board. So we've talked about the fact that there is an economic cost of exclusion. We've talked about the fact that companies, corporates can operating in this space can make sure that they are bringing people into the economy and they are creating value. So the logical question then is, what can corporates do in order to benefit from this and add value to themselves and to the economy?
I think, I would sort of pick the points about it is not a checklist exercise. Either you have the heart of doing it or you don't have the heart. But we also believe in heart transplant at Right Circle. So bring in the heart, which believes in creating inclusive mindset and inclusive behavior and inclusive thought process. So that's where we start from, right from the top of the leadership, top of the pyramid, so that it cascades down. But we also do a sandwich approach, wherein we also create the ecosystem, which is the young population, which would be in the organization to start demanding that. So we are trying to, sort of do a sandwich between demand and supply. The youngsters and like demographics dividend, India is the youngest country. Imagine in the next 15, 20 years, all the young minds are going to be knocking at the doors. Are the organizations ready? I think that's the pitch for the organizations here. That is your organization ready with the culture? And that's something that we truly work with the leadership. And the journey has been quite extraordinary. And I'll again come back to Keshav, who's waving at somebody. So we also wanted to see that when we are working with the companies, are they truly walking the talk? How they are reporting back? I think that's where, in partnership with Keshav and with Stonewall, we came up with country's first India Workplace Equality Index that sort of helps the organization to monitor, measure, and course correct the work that they're doing on LGBT plus inclusion. And it's been 4 years, and we have, the next Friday, we are announcing the organizations who've made it to gold, silver, and bronze categories and some of the individual achievers. And when we started that first year, we had about 60 companies. And in 4 years, we've gone to 120. So it's, 1:3 is, Indian versus multinational representation. So it goes to tell you that it's not just the lip service, but also companies are truly invested in measuring, establishing the baseline, assessing how their culture is, processes are, leadership commitment are. And then because you put them on the stage, there is a FOMO, peer pressure. So we also use those avenues to do that, and we've seen great results in, ever since the ruling down of 377 happened.
Yeah, I mean, to put the figures in context, right, we're talking on a very conservative estimate. The LGBTQ population in India is, 200 million people? And growing, because as you say, it's the youngest population in the world. It's 1.4 billion people. And growing. So when you talk about the 5 trillion economy goal, I think we've just reached 4. So we want to go from 4 to 5 trillion. We need to harness the economic empowerment of that 200 million people. Let's just touch on then a point that came out of what you were talking about, Srini. You were talking about leadership. And you were talking about the fact that this is not something that just goes from the grassroots. It's also something that has to come from the top. Companies have to demonstrate leadership, and LaLiT Group has been demonstrating that for a long time now. But Ms. Kidwai, I want to come to you for a moment, because you have been a trailblazer for women in this country, and particularly for women in the corporate world, particularly for women in the financing world. What is your view of how leadership can impact a corporation's inclusion journey? And particularly from the view of being a leader on the board, how does that impact a corporate's inclusion agenda?
I think if you talk about the role of a leader, it has to be about respect for every human being. And it's respect for the ideas they put forward, it's respect for who they are and what they stand for. And I think the one aspect which maybe we have not given enough attention to is when can we create an environment in the country, because it's not just a company, where people are happy to profess who they are. I'm thinking of all those young people who still suppress who they are. I was struck that while at HSBC, we had a global head of retail banking, and he chose to go public with his sexuality in the middle of that role. But it was something which he had kept quiet. I don't know how deep the understanding of who he was actually existed. But it was so wonderful that he did it, and he did it from a platform where he was who he was. He was the global head of retail banking and he made, what was virtually a sort of coming out a statement. Now, but why does it take so long for people to be who they are and be happy in their skins? And I think that's the hard part, and that's the whole cultural overlay, which it's hard for a corporate to be able to address. So we have to keep working at it to give people the courage to be who they are, because we give them the space in the corporate world. And as a leader, yes, I was one of the few women in my organization. I was fortunate. I was basically working in multinational corporations who kind of got it before Indian companies did, sadly. And they were meritocracies, so they rewarded merit, and they were not there when gender had not really become something people were pushing, but they respected me for who I was, for the ideas, and for what I brought to the table. And that was all I wanted. I didn't want a quota. I didn't want to be told I was going to be promoted because I was a woman. I just wanted a voice at the table. I did not want to be dismissed. I did not want to be the one who was asked to go make the coffee. And that is what we are looking to change, that every human being gets addressed, and the leader sets that. If the leader is dismissive of an individual because of who they are and what they represent, it will inevitably get picked up down the line. And on the other hand, if that leader, and that's the role you play, you single out people for their views. If they haven't spoken up, you ask them what their view is. You accept, you challenge, you give them that voice at the table. That right behavior begins to get replicated, because we all get influenced by what we see as good leadership, because we want to become good leaders. But equally, and your point is so valid, that down in terms of what is happening at the grassroots level also has to be continuously monitored and worked on, so that the culture that is set begins to go all the way down. As for boards, I think what we can really mainly do is ask questions. We don't run the companies, but we can certainly influence the norms by which the CEO and his team get assessed. So asking the questions of diversity, and by diversity I mean across the board, by asking what is happening, by understanding the training programs, just by asking the questions, we force management to come back with the answers. So if they're not doing it, they start doing it. And if they are doing well, then we're able to pat them on the table. But yes, boards do play a role in that. And at the end of the day, I hesitate to say, hey, we want you because of your sexual proclivity on the board. It should really be, we want you because you represent a talent stream that is important. And yes, it's helpful, but it's not the reason why you come to the board. As women in India, we have the one woman on board, which really helped as a policy. I'm not for quotas typically, but took India from the single digits up to 20%, just short of 20% today. We needed a policy, so maybe sometimes we need that push, but not necessarily to keep a quota there forever. And it can't be about one person either. You have to have that mix so that that individual doesn't feel like they're the only one in the room all the time.
So, and of course, I'm glad to say we have two past FICCI presidents in the room, and they're both women, right?
It took 85 years of FICCI for the first woman president to happen, but it did. And the good news is it continues, because we've had more than now. We've had 3 and we will have more.
So not another 85 years, but hopefully 85 years of women presidents. That should be the aim. I mean, you know, there's quotas, but then there's also one of the things that we're doing in the UK, which one of the things I've been working on, is rather than requiring quotas, we're just simply asking for disclosure. So we're saying, just tell us what the makeup of your board is, right? Disclose that in the public domain. You don't have to have a quota, but the disclosure also then creates an environment in which people start competing. So that can be an interesting
I want
tool.
to just jump in here on a very important part of the measurement that you're doing. See, the big norm for companies right now is ESG. So environment, society, governance. And the good news is that diversity is one of the factors that is getting measured in there, and companies are really quite driven now by indicating that they are performing well on ESG indices. So to make sure that the diversity definition is truly comprehensive would be very important, because it's then embedded in the company's measurement systems. And it doesn't stand on its own, it's absolutely part of it.
So it's not just about having these aims, it's also about creating accountability and creating a system in which companies have to answer for what they're doing. So Fabrice, let's talk about the association, because you founded this association of corporate LGBTQ directors. And what's the idea behind it, and why do you think there's a need for LGBTQ representation in senior leadership?
Well, you know, that's interesting. I'm a bit opportunistic. In the United States, in the aftermath of the George Floyd murder, there started to be an interest in knowing who was in positions of power. Because a stable society is a society where everybody feels that they have a voice, a contribution. And so, you know, they started requiring this disclosure about who is on the board, because the shareholder should know if you have an all-white board, right? The shareholder should know if you have an all-men board, right? It does have an impact on the company. And so in that process, NASDAQ, which is the, you know, one of 2 exchanges in the United States, asked all of its listed companies to disclose who was on the board in their proxy, including on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, which was actually very novel, meaning that you have a matrix that shows, you know, with Latino, with Black, with Asian, but also with LGBT and with non-binary. So that led to a little bit of a greater conscience of the fact that LGBT people do not have board seats. And in fact, only 0.8% of Fortune 500 companies have only 0.8% of the board seats in Fortune 500 companies are occupied by self-identified LGBT people. And then similarly in NASDAQ, which is 3,300 companies, only 1.2% of the board seats are occupied by LGBTQ plus people. And so you kind of stole my idea, which is that I say, look, you have this amazing talent that you don't know about, and you should maybe consider them for board seats. And by the way, they might add a contribution on the LGBTQ plus strategy of the company. So, you know, it's only beginning to trigger some interest in this talent. I think, you know, we also have to consider the fact that this is a very specific generation. People from 45 to maybe 75 years old that have lived in an ecosystem where you had to be in the closet to succeed in business. So the 4 people that are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies that are LGBT were in the closet for a very long time, and they would probably never have made it to that position if they had been open to their sexual orientation. So, you know, one of them very famous, Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, he came out very recently, you know, pretty late in life. There's another man, Jim Fitterling, who is the CEO of Dow Chemical that Krish knows very well. And, you know, it's actually very striking because he came out right before becoming CEO, and he came out because he had cancer. And he had this kind of realization that hiding who he had been for such a long time might have taken a toll on his well-being. And that's, you know, that's something that I want to talk briefly about. You know, when Lee and I were working at the World Bank, there was a chief economist called Kaushik Basu, an Indian chief economist, wonderful man, not gay, but a huge champion for LGBT equality. And he showed leadership. Even though nobody at the bank wanted to touch Lee and I with a 10-foot pole, he came to our meeting on the cost of homophobia. And he said something wonderful, which I will always remember. He said, it's a good thing that LGBT inclusion is going to increase GDP. It's a good thing that it might increase the bottom line of the company. But even if it was going to decrease GDP, and even if it was going to decrease the bottom line of the company, we should do it because it is the right thing to do. And you know, one of the things that I will say is that to me, as a gay man, what is the most striking is that tonight there is millions of Indian kids that are going to go to bed praying to wake up with a different sexual orientation and praying to wake up with a different gender identity. And as a father of two 10-year-olds, it's heartbreaking to think that there are children in the world that are battling this incredibly important part of who they are without being able to talk about it to their parents, without being able to talk about it to their priest, without being able to talk about it to their teacher. And the damage it does to children is lifelong, right? It stays with them forever, and it affects their outcome in life. You know, one of the things that Lee is often talking about is the fact that it affects their life expectancy. That having to go through that stress, that anxiety, that self-hatred ultimately impact how long you're going to live. And so we should never remember that as much as we're talking about the pink economy, as much as we're talking about the potential beneficial impact on the economy, we are also doing that because as human beings, why would we admit that suffering of LGBTQ plus people forever? You know, at some point it has to stop.
Thank you, Fabrice. That's very, very helpful and very emotive. Where we are now, we've got 10 minutes, so we're going to do one more question and then we'll go to the audience for the chance to win a copy of Lee's book. And I know you have to leave at 12:30, so we'll finish sharpish. But let's do one more question and let's go across the board. Maybe Ms. Kidwai, if I start with you. But for an organization that wants to do the right thing, because I think, you know, Fabrice, what was interesting about what Fabrice was talking about is even if it doesn't impact the bottom line, even if it is not going to help you grow your profitability, do you really need another reason apart from the fact that this is the right thing to do, right? The moral case and the economic case, we talk about the moral case for inclusion and the economic case for inclusion. The economic case shouldn't really be trumping the moral case, right? So there we are. But for organizations that want to get it right, for whatever reason, where do they start? Particularly for organizations that may not be as sophisticated, that may not be as advanced in their journey as the LaLiT Group, for example. But if it's an organization that's looking at the LaLiT Group and thinking, well, I want to get there, right? So where should they start? Maybe if I start with you.
I think the LaLiT Group is a good example of, have someone who heads that role, so there is focus within the organization of what needs to be done. Because you may want to, and you may think you're doing the right things, but actually you're not. It's a sensitive subject, so it needs to be dealt with sensitivity. You bring best practice in, but a lot of it, I think, has to do with the conversations. Can you encourage the conversations? Can you make sure people are coming together to understand what it is that you're seeking to achieve? So you set a role for someone in the organization to make sure that the conversations are happening right, someone who's well informed, someone who can go out to the consultants, to the advisors to get it right. And then as you implement this and as you evolve, you learn to reward it. To me, the morality is actually the most important. You start with that, and it's about respect for every human being, right? It doesn't matter what caste, creed, color, and our society is, I'll speak for India, is such a mix that, and we have grown up with so many of these norms embedded in us, from which part of the country you come. You speak with different accents, you have different likes and dislikes, and we get exposed to this every day. Sadly, which caste you are. So we begin to put people into boxes very easily and very quickly. It's about now cutting through that, and I think the young do this quite well, because they embrace people for who they are much more easily, because the good news is we've become such a big melting pot of cross-religion marriages, cross-caste marriages. People are meeting in schools, in colleges. This is the best thing that could happen, so that you're forgetting the box that you think the person belongs to, that marriage advertisement that says good Brahmin boy goes away. And what you then create is an environment where every human being is there for who they are and how they think and what they bring to the organization. Now, this may be very idealistic. I don't think it's impossible to get there. And some of it has to be about just managing that balance. And sometimes I worry that we commit it too hard. And that's why my sort of anti-quota statement, because you then create a backlash. And you have to be very careful you don't create a backlash, because you aren't then seen as, oh, we are only favoring women and people who are different, and then the others begin to feel left out, and then you get a backlash. It has to be that mix of its merit, its talent, its diversity of viewpoint, and you're there at that table with your voice because we care about what you represent, not who you are in terms of your sexual proclivities. So it's a tough journey, and I think so much will have to be about people coming out of the closet too, because you don't know what you're dealing with until they tell you if they're having an issue. But if we can create an environment where they don't see it an issue at work, that's the little thing we can do, in that they are there because they are valued for the talent that they are, then maybe they find that voice, as the head of retail banking at HSBC did, to come out and say, hey, this is who I am, and do it early enough so that they can be comfortable in their own skin. But I feel what they go back to at home, I mean, I know from, say, my daughter's generation, that amongst them they know and they don't care and they just love each other. But often the kid has not yet shared it back home. So the pressure that that child is facing back home, what they take back there to their parents and the home environment, is very, very worrying. And for that, I think, again, a corporate can help. If we know and we form a support group amongst friends, amongst workers, maybe we are the safe place that that person comes to happily, even while they have to contend with the bigotry of home life and society and culture.
I think that's a very interesting point, and that is that there's this disjunct between the environment at home and the environment at work, and sometimes you can be more yourself at work than you can at home, and corporates can provide that sort of safe space. Lee, I'll go to you next. So for a corporate that's starting its journey, what should they look at?
Well, I think having that conversation is really the key thing, and starting with LGBT people themselves to understand what's happening to them in the workplace, because that is something that you can do about. The kind of connection with home is a lot harder, and that's hard and that's challenging because people may not be out. Some ways around that kind of not paradox, conundrum might be to do a survey, or if you do surveys of your workforce, add some questions that might be relevant for people of different sexual orientations and gender identities. Because ultimately, the only way you're going to know whether those policies, the tick boxes that you met, are making a difference is to look and see what people are telling you about their experience in the workplace. And that plays two roles. One is, are people comfortable telling you this, or not, in terms of sexual orientation and gender identity? But one of the leading best practices of organizations around the world now is to start asking those questions. And there are companies that operate in India that do collect data on the sexual orientation and gender identity of people in their workplaces, so they can provide opportunities for LGBT people, so they can pull in LGBT people when there are opportunities to be part of conversations, for example. So that's already happening. And then the last thing I will say is to think about it as a journey. It's not just kind of getting all your ducks in a row one time, but it's a process of continual growth. And part of that growth is to create structures, to create cultures of openness, but also to create mechanisms of accountability. Because I will tell you that when we look at the best practices in the United States for race and gender inclusion, what we learned was it's not enough to just have a diverse workforce. It's not enough to just have those policies. But you've got to have people whose job it is to make sure that diversity and inclusion happens. So there are lots of things for employers to think about. But I think thinking about it as that journey, and that first step is learning about what's happening with your employees right now.
Srini, Fabrice, any closing thoughts on that?
What both of you just said, I think we also start with questioning. I'll give you from an Indian context, and because the question was how do you start the journey? We start with questioning on two things, and we've realized over the last so many years that there are two things that influences all of us: fear and ignorance. Fear of unknown. I don't know whether this is the right thing to do, whether this is the wrong thing to do, whether I can do this, whether I can't do this. So it's also reflecting and introspecting and articulating, saying that what is my fear. Second piece is, what do I don't know? What do I know? So asking those leaders, individuals, that what is your level of ignorance? Do you know what's happening in the country? Do you know what's happening at campuses? Do you know what's happening at parents? What's happening at workplaces? I think that's where we start the conversation. And then we know that we can craft a proper 3-year roadmap for a corporate. We ask the same question to parents. We ask the same question to teachers, because we work in all these 4 spaces. We work with parents and kids. We work with campuses, with faculty, teachers, students. We work with workplaces, leaders, and even with non-profits and other organizations. Our question sort of cuts across. And that, irrespective of whether you're an LGBT person, outer closeted, allies, outer closeted. Allies are closeted as well. So I think this question helps them to anchor that where they are, how much of visible and vocal participation they can show. And that's where we sort of start the conversation and tell them that, look, this is where you have to create. And a lot of times I get this question saying that, oh, we have been doing this for 3 years, no one has come out. Come on, it's not a measurement that you did this, so somebody has to come out, because it's an individual's journey and the level of their own readiness to come out. But you have to continue creating that ecosystem. It's like you keeping your storage at home, kitchen full, not because you're going to eat everything every day, but tomorrow if you're going to come and reach to your refrigerator, you know that I can have this, an apple or an other fruit. So you're preparing for the future. I think that's what the approach has been for us, and that's what we've been dealing with conversations.
Thank you. And Fabrice?
The first time I came to India in 2012, I went to the bank's second largest office in Chennai, huge office, right? And so when I arrived there, the people from HR were a little bit baffled, and they said to me, look, we don't have gay people here. And I said, well, let me do my presentation, and then I'll leave you in peace. And there's a young guy that wrote to me on Facebook after a while, and he said, look, I'm from Calcutta. I could not come to your meeting because I didn't want people to see me there. But he said, I'm gay, and I'm in the closet, and I'm really happy you came. And then, that guy, he ended up creating the employee resource group in the Chennai office, and now there's a vibrant employee resource group. So I think the point which you all made is you have to start somewhere. And I'll tell you one last story, which is that, I have to find a husband pretty urgently, and so I need to lose a little bit of weight. And my shrink said to me, she said, don't go to the gym. She said, put your sneakers on. She said, you don't have to go to the gym, just put your sneakers on. So I've been staying at the LaLiT in Bangalore, and I went twice to the gym because I put my sneakers on. And so I would say to company, put your sneakers on, just start somewhere, and and then maybe you'll get to the LaLiT point, and I'll get in perfect shape.
So, it's a great way to end. So we start with having a conversation. we start with asking the questions, and I think the point that you made earlier was, you have to find a focus point, so you perhaps create the role so that someone is responsible, and you create accountability. So you start with putting your sneakers on. That's the takeaway. So all these interesting takeaways. There's a box of crayons, putting your sneakers on. I don't know what else we'll come up with. We're going to go to a question from the audience. Anyone have a question? Okay, there are 2 questions. So yes, both of you. The lady in the...
I've done books like Gendered Leadership in the Boardroom in India, and my latest one from Emerald is about gendered leadership, or the lack of it, in the hospitality industry in India. And I've come to the conclusion that after in-depth research for about 2 years with my team, that one of the biggest reasons is that it's a very alpha male-centric view of leadership in the hospitality industry, which maybe has to be broken. But anyway, that's just to give you a background. So my concern as a D&I scholar is that diversity doesn't necessarily lead to inclusion. So in the corporate sector, you could have a lot of normative rules, bring in more people, hire, put in gender, language in a certain way in an advertisement so you can have a bigger pool. But it doesn't necessarily, and many times it doesn't lead to inclusion, right? So you could have, we talk about D&I, we talk about ESG, and we also talk about intersectionality. But I personally feel that these are now very old and antiquated terms, and we now need to change the narrative and talk about things like psychological safety in the workplace. A lot of you spoke about surveys. I mean, there's employee engagement surveys and all sorts of things, but why not psychological safety surveys, or even put it in the appraisal form of a manager? Because that covers everything, isn't it? Diversity and inclusion, whoever you are, whatever you are. I'm sorry I'm going on a bit, but I'm a professor, so I go on a bit. So I just did a recent executive developmental thing with a large group of managers, about 30 of them, and there was one class one session I had to do with them on upward management. That turned out to be so controversial because they kept asking me questions like, can you give us an HBR article on how to manage a toxic boss? So I realized that there's some problem with the person that they're reporting into. And I was thinking, my God, these are, I think, heterosexual people, but if they're not feeling safe to speak out, God help any other employee on the fringes. Do you get what I'm saying? So I'm asking the question, should we not be changing the narrative?
Who wants to tackle that?
I can jump in and then run, sadly, but I think you're absolutely right. We started by, I think, pretty much agreeing it's not about the tick boxes. It's about the culture of the organization. And that is much harder. So many companies will show up saying they're doing the right thing because there is a laundry list now. And that's why we need the consultants. That's why we need the accountability in the organization. And the only test is the culture of the organization. And it does show up in surveys. If employees don't feel engaged, it will show up in a survey on engagement scores. So those outcomes are important to measure. But you're right, we have to keep working at creating that right culture. And the good news on psychological safety, and it's a good point, is that through COVID, looking at the mental health of employees has suddenly become a big issue. Companies are opening helplines on that. Now, it came from a different space. It was to do much more with stress that people faced through COVID. But the good news is those helplines exist now. And from that helpline, there's, in many companies now, a system by which people can avail of help and support outside the organization, anonymity is guaranteed, etc. So it could be a very good starting point. The same way as we had the POSH system, which allowed women to report on sexual harassment. The systems exist for those that seek help. The line to say, hey, I need help, and B, I need psychological support. But I think we should advertise this a lot more internally so people reach out before they go and harm themselves at any rate. Yeah.
Let me quickly jump in and give the point. I think the question here is not the intent. The question here could also be the fact that why are the employees not expressing themselves? are there any systematic barriers or any issues or concerns? Because I may run hundreds of surveys. If there are no uptakers and there is no response, I will not be able to gauge the pulse of my organization. So do you have anonymous channels wherein the employees can record how they are feeling? So a lot of companies today have apps. They have a checkpoint wherein during your swipe in, swipe out, there is a machine which sort of you can give a certain keypad which tells you. So there are a lot of mechanisms to measure. To do that, you have to create a culture of openness and encourage people to participate. But like you said, give me an HBR article to manage my boss. If that is the article or that's the concern, no matter how many surveys I run, your participation rate would be less than 10%. So the issue here is, and then the psychological safety, the well-being can be then crafted because based on the responses that I get. So a lot of times, I'll give one example, a lot of companies use this tool called Yammer. YAMMER. Yammer is an anonymous channel for internal conversation and chat, which allows a user to anonymously change the name and anonymously chat. And this is being used for a lot of pride-related LGBT plus conversation for those who are closeted. Now, especially because we are talking about this, it helps you, because you cannot track back within the IT systems. Because let me run the survey, you can track back who responded. Let me run it on, Survey Monkey and other, I can trace it back as to who responded. But there are mechanisms which tells the employees that, look, I have confidence in you, you can report it anonymously. Pretty much like your prevention of sexual harassment cases, you have to keep it anonymous. So some of those techniques that the corporates are using to make sure that people get right voice, safe voice, capture the data, then create the plan in terms of how do I create the awareness, train the managers, what the issues are, and then you see that's how there are a lot of organizations in 5 years they would become a great place to work because they are using this technique to identify, and this is one of many things. So imagine an organization doing that for many more things.
Thank you, Srini. One more question there was.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alicia. I work with an organization called Connecting Dreams Foundation. Apologies in advance if my question is not very articulate. I have a couple of thoughts in my mind. So, very recently we were having there was a discussion of legalization of same-sex marriage in India, and there was a senior counsel who called it as an urban elite concept, which is sadly very untrue, and of course it was negated by the CJI. But taking that in account, marriage in India is attached to a lot of administrative advantages that people can have, and keeping that in mind, since we are talking about the pink economy, majority of the workforce comes from varied places in India. So although the thing that the senior counsel said that the same-sex marriage is an urban elite concept, while that is very untrue, however, the conversations related to the conversation that we are having today, these conversations of awareness, conversations of acceptance, I believe is very layered, first of all, and of course the access to these conversations across different intersectionalities is also very different. Like LGBTQIA community is of course a community, of course, but there are several intersectionalities in that community as well. So the access to the conversations we are having today is also very much different for different groups of people. So my question to you is, how do we make these conversations more seamless and more accessible to people who are probably not in the urban space right now? And because this awareness should reach to the rural spaces and people from different sections of the urban communities as well, only when this conversation will go ahead, I think that the awareness will be there, the acceptance, the coming out, and then the conversations can go ahead further, because the workforce is not just limited to the urban upper class or middle class. The workforce comes from migration from rural communities as well. So how do we make this conversation more seamless and more accessible is my question.
Well, I love your question, I have to say. And this is nothing new. In France, when they demonstrated against same-sex marriage, 1 million people went in the street in 2013, I think, to demonstrate against same-sex marriage. They were convinced, some were convinced, right, that there were 5,000 gay people in France that were trying to hijack the conversation, right? Because there were so few LGBT people that were out in public life, that they were under the impression that there were very few LGBT people. Well, the reality is that, of course, the only people that are visible are, people that tend to have money, people that tend to be educated, right? Because they have that agency that comes with being a male, that comes with, and I think that's the mistake that the Indian government made, right? Is that, of course, you only see the elite being out because it's easier to be out if you're rich. It's easier to be out if you are educated. But the reality is that we know that same-sex attraction and non-conforming gender identity is distributed equally, and frankly, it's a no-brainer. It's distributed equally over society. So my friend Lee Badgett here did a study at the beginning that, a long time ago, that showed that gay people were not rich, educated, with two great jobs, people with no kids that had a lot of money, which was the impression for a very long time. What she said is that you only see those people, but actually, if you look, LGBT people are overrepresented in the 40% poorest of the population. And and it's not rocket science, right? If you are a bit marginalized in the society, chances are you have less economic opportunities, chances are you've been dropping out of school, chances are you don't have very good health outcomes. So I think, it's basically a bias that comes with the fact that we have to be in the closet, and we have to hide ourselves. And so, now there is a huge narrative in the US that there is contagion, right? That basically when you see a gay person on television, you're going to become gay. Which, of course, doesn't really work because I've been seeing a lot of straight people in television and I have not become straight yet, although, it might happen in old age. But this is ridiculous, right? This idea that there is contagion. The reality is that the more tolerant the world is becoming, the more we are willing to say I am gay, the more we are willing to leave our gender identity. And so, to be honest, that argument to say, well, this is an elite issue, it's not very clever. It comes from people that clearly have not thought about the issue very much.
Yeah. So how do we make those conversations happen, Srini?
Yeah. So it's just not the scholar; even the consultants likes to talk. So to your question, very interesting. Two pieces to it. When we started hiring for our company, I wanted to make sure that I have representation of my company in tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. I'll give one example. 3 years back, we hired a trans woman who's transitioning now in Lucknow. And from somebody who was thrown out of the house to now is one of my high performers in the hiring team. She has not just gone through the process of family accepting her because she became economically empowered and she was able to sort of show that she can stand on her own. Secondly, she is now able to help the other trans women in the vicinity in the city, and she's already helped about 30 of them get the trans ID. Okay, so I'm just giving you an example that how the change can happen in the space we all are. I could have easily chosen to be in tier 1 city where the money is, becoming capitalist. I want from IT company. I have I was telling that point of time, and this was very intentional because only being intentional can get you where you want to go in the future. In March of 2020, right before COVID, we were just two of us, me and Ram as founders. Today we are a team of 54. All this growth happened during COVID. 60% of my staff is openly out. We are very conscious in hiring. And we are based in 10 cities in India. And these are in tier 2, tier 3. Imagine one person getting hired in this small town can make this impact. All of us, collective strength here, what difference we can make if we vernacularize the language, the conversation. I know that this becomes an elite conversation to a certain degree, but then if we were to talk about it, that's what we do. Talking in Hindi, talking in South Indian languages and etc. can really reach, and that's what we've been consciously doing in the last 6 years.
Lee?
Yeah, I love the question, and you have to ask the question in order to start thinking about why that happens. I mean, aside from the great ideas from Fabrice and Srini, I just want to add that this is a place where academics can make a difference, where students can make a difference in research that they do. To add that to the questions that we ask when we do research on LGBT people, to get our National Statistics Office to ask those questions. Because once you do, what you start to see is that there's huge economic diversity in the LGBT communities anywhere in the world. So asking the question is really the first thing to do. Thank you.
So it's not an urban elite concept.
It's marriage equality. It's not same-sex marriage. It's marriage equality, and always keep correcting.
So yeah, so it's not an urban elite concept. We need to start asking questions. We've got to start somewhere, create conversations, take people on that journey with us, and hopefully we reap the benefits of LGBTQ inclusion in the economy, or queering the pitch. I think, thank you all for your insights. I know that, well, I think I will leave it to Lee to decide who gets the book. We might have to have a vote, but we won't do this sort of, X Factor style. But thank you for your contributions.
We can ask the Supreme Court to decide for us.
Wait, I was going to say something. I'm not going to say it. But anyway, but thank you for the contributions. Oh, there are more questions. Sorry, I was told to wrap it up by 10:45, and I'm 4 minutes behind. So there we go. If there are more questions, can we take some questions? Can we take some more questions? Okay, good. Okay, well, where are the questions?
Okay, good morning, panelists. My name is Aditya Choithani. I'm from a school called Tagore International School, Vasant Vihar, and we're part of a campaign called Breaking Barriers. It was the nation's first campaign that supported, that advocated for issues faced by members of the LGBTQAI plus community. And so my question to you is, how can we implement tangible strategies to promote a more inclusive environment in schools and other educational institutions? Because when we go for sensitization workshops, or whenever we conduct events at the school or a local level, we see that there's a stigma in the minds of people, and it's really hard for us to, talk about it when we're fortunate enough to come from a school that promotes inclusivity. So that was just what I wanted to know.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's an amazing question. Yeah. I have to say that a lot of the suffering of LGBT people starts at home, with their parents, and sometimes there is homophobic discourse from a very early age and people integrate it. But then the second source of suffering is school. And LGBT people tend to always a little bit minimize what happened to them. They will say, oh, I was bullied in school, but I'm fine now. Look at me, I have a great job. But it's kind of a common thread that every time you talk to an LGBT person, they talk very often about school as being a place of suffering, which is really heartbreaking, right? Because why would children have to face alone rejection very early on? It comes back to my point that it is so damaging to be told from an early age that you don't belong, to be the one kid that, at recess is by himself. And the only way we can change that is by starting to portray LGBT people in curriculum, in the books that are studied in school. I was in my bedroom last night at the LaLiT, and there were 2 books for children. And I think that's very important. As a child, if I had received a book that had told me, you're not diseased, you're not a problem, you're actually a beautiful human being and you've been created that way, it would have completely changed the course of my life and the way I relate to myself. So, people will tell you we shouldn't talk to children about sexual orientation and gender identity, and we should always fight back when we hear that. Because believe me, from an early age, I knew exactly what I was attracted to, I love to say that when I would receive a clothing catalog, when I would see a clothing catalog, I would go directly to the male underwear section. From the moment I was born, I knew that I was attracted to men. And yet, I didn't talk about it for 22 years. For 22 years, I had that conversation in my head. So I think, we should always fight back when people are saying, this is not a topic for children. Of course it is a topic for children. And my little boys have known about the diversity of sexual orientation and gender identity from the age they were 4, and both Lee and Krishna have met them, and they are not completely crazy. They're actually pretty well adjusted. So I think we can do that.
Lee?
Yeah, I would just start with the fact that, as far as I know, and all the history that I've read about LGBT plus people in different parts of the world, change always begins with organizing a group of people, that there's a power in numbers, we support each other, we provide context, and then it's harder to ignore us. So I think in school settings, groups of students have made tremendous differences. And then, making sure that your teachers and professors have the opportunity to support you is important. We kind of all can work together to change what happens in institutions. But I want to hear what Srini has to say, because I know you guys are thinking about this.
Yeah, so very interestingly, I must tell you that we resonate completely with you, what you just said about the change beginning at home. So we very consciously invested in building team which focus on pride in education. So you would find my colleagues right at the back holding the camera and shooting. So in the team we have young people. So when we started, we received pushback. You cannot talk about this, parents are against this, and etc. So do you know that there are 2 groups in Delhi NCR? One is Sweekar, which is a parents group, right? Parents of LGBT kids. So you need support, engage with them. Dr. Sanjay Sharma is very much available, runs an organization called Athi. Second, Gurgaon Moms. 35,000 moms who are part of that. So you definitely have parents who we go engage. Secondly, talk to the campuses, faculty, and we work with over 400 high schools, colleges, STEM schools, STEM colleges, management colleges, and we realize that there's so much more work to do. Right? So initially when I spoke about the India Workplace Equality Index, which measures the organization's involvement, and I'm very proud to break this news to this group, because I was planning to do this next week. So we realized that, like all of my co-panelists said, that a person's journey begins at home. So we realized that an individual who starts at home expects an inclusive home, deserves an inclusive home. And that same individual would look for a school and a college to study inclusive. So how do we do that? So we realized that we could through the workplace index, we were able to tell the individuals saying that, hey, here are the organizations that you could work at because this is inclusive. We said that we are doing the same thing for educational institutions now from 2024. So with great pride, I tell you and announce that from next year, we are launching India Education Equality Index, which is going to measure schools and colleges. And help them get the NAC accreditation and other scoring to help the colleges and school attract talent who are probably is unaware where to go and study and create that inclusive schools and colleges. We have already have 10 colleges who have signed up for this. It's a free study, just like Index. We don't charge anything. So that's where Fabrice mentioned that, how is your curriculum? How is your campus? How is your hostels? How is your washrooms, infrastructure, how inclusive? So we rate the institutions on that and give ratings. So that is where the change would begin. Imagine the country in next 10 years having a list of 400 schools and colleges which is inclusive. So much better for parents and LGBT young kids and minds to say that this is where I belong, this is where I want to study, this is where I want to work, and they do not have to come out. Yesterday, Fabrice and I, we were talking, there is a man who came out at the age of 95. Imagine the struggle, and you have to hide for 95 years. I want to change that. No kid should hide and go through what Fabrice went through in 22 years, right? So that's my commitment, and that's what we are trying to strive with Pride Circle.
And particularly when people say, that, talking about inclusion is not something for schools or school children. I mean, look at fairy tales. Like, we talk about heteronormative, relationships all the time. So it's not as if we don't talk about these things. We have to, and as Fabrice says, it doesn't turn people gay or straight, right? It doesn't. We've been watching all of these Disney cartoons. It doesn't turn you straight. So there we are.
In fact, I think it turned us even gayer.
Well, I think that's another panel discussion that we can have on a different day. There's another question there.
No, I do have.
Hi, I'm Kritika. I work at the LaLiT Group of Hotels. My question I think my question is to Srini. We often talk about inclusion in terms of LGBTQ plus people. We often sometimes forget about caste. So I want to talk to you a little bit about caste inclusion and how that plays in, because the first level of bullying, so to speak, as a Dalit person myself, the first thing of bullying that I faced was because of my caste. It was not because of sexuality, it was not because of gender. So how do we sort of tackle that? And how important is caste inclusion at a place like Pride Circle?
Thank you for the question, with deep voice. You must read the report published by Goldman Sachs a couple of months back, which spoke about caste. So there are a couple of investment banking organizations like Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, Northern Trust. They have the groups, just like your employee resource group for pride and women and etc. They too have groups. So there's conversations happening. At the same time, we need to acknowledge and understand that that's a little, a subject that needs a little bit of, careful sort of conversation. We take a lot of pride in intersectionality, because that's where I spoke about tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cities. So we make sure that we bring those conversations to the boardroom, to the corporates, to talk about it is important to look at religion, caste, other sort of layers when we peel the onion. And I always say that when you peel it, you will cry, doesn't matter, but then you'll enjoy the meal that comes later. So that's what we do, and we take a lot of pride in doing that. So for us, everything is equally important, and we do not sort of brush it under the carpet.
I think it's a really important point, because when we talk about LGBTQ inclusion, we have to also think about LGBTQ people are also members of all sorts of other communities, right? You can look at the caste, you can look at gender, you can look at in a country like India, you can look at where you come from, you can look at socioeconomic background. So it's not a vertical that works on its own; it is intersectional in itself. So that's a really important point. So thank you for raising that. I think on that point, I'm being given the signal that we do have to end. So thank you for all your questions. But if there are more questions, there is brunch afterwards, and we can gather, and I'm sure the conversation will continue. I believe I'm handing over to His Excellency Federico Salas to address the audience. Shall I ask everyone just to remain seated so we avoid disruption, and we can just carry on? Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and congratulations to the panel. I think it's been very interesting and very, very useful and very enlightening for all of us, what we have heard here. I was asked to address you and talk a little bit about the pink economy, and especially the case of Mexico. And I will be very brief, because I think a lot of what I was going to say has already been mentioned here. But I want to start with 2 points that I think are particularly important. One of them, which I think was mentioned by our French colleague here, is that the whole question of inclusion and bringing people from the LGBT community into the economic mainstream is not a question just of what the economic benefits of it are, but it's actually the right thing to do. And I think that this is something that we should start from that premise, that certainly the rights that we all deserve are the right thing to do. This is something that we don't need to argue too much about, but of course we've had to argue about this, and we've had to convince many people that this is certainly, that is what it is. But at the same time, I think it's important that when we try to convey the argument of why is it important, why is it this inclusion, the economics do help in making a very persuasive argument. And I think also some things that were said here are important. It was mentioned, for example, how the spending power, the economic power of the LGBT community can be estimated in about $5 trillion, which is what the Indian economy aims to be in a few years. But what that actually makes it now is that the LGBT community by itself, if it were a country, it will be already the 5th most powerful economy in the world. And this is something that we should not lose sight of. I mean, we have an enormous power in our hands that if used in a constructive and intelligent way, it can be very, very useful. It's interesting also to see that in some estimates that have been made in terms of the achievement of certain rights in some countries that the community has made, it has been measured that for every right, every progress that has been made in reaching the rights of the LGBT community, this makes a contribution of about $400 to the GDP per capita in the, I'm sorry, the GDP per capita increases by $400 in that specific country. And if it's because of a change of legislation that these rights are given to the community, the increase goes up to $1,200. And I think that that's also very important, that we should not lose sight of the fact that for every progress, every step that we move ahead, we're also, there's a very important economic contribution that is being made to the countries that, where we all are. In the case of Mexico, let me say that we're a country, we're about a tenth the size of India, about 130 million people. It is estimated that probably at least the LGBT community accounts for something like 10 million people. And this is, it's just an estimate, of course. But what that means is that the contribution of this community to the GDP of the Mexican economy is about 5%, or about $80 billion per year. And this is something, these are figures from there's a Mexican Federation of LGBT business owners, very similar to some of the organizations that already exist here in India and of course, in many other parts of the world. One of the things that is being done to a large extent is focusing on specific sectors of the economy to promote the participation and the presence of the LGBT members. And in the case of Mexico, there are certain areas where this is particularly important. One of them, of course, is tourism, and the pink economy in the case of tourism in Mexico is very significant. Let me just put that in context, that tourism for Mexico is one of our primary sources of income, is the 3rd largest source of foreign income in Mexico. So we're talking about not a sector that is marginalized, but one of the most important sectors of the economy. So the fact that the LGBT community has an important role to play in this sector has, in a sense, an outsized impact of the community in the overall economy of the country. And at the same time, in Mexico, we have, being one of the largest tourism recipients in the world, we're also, it's estimated that about 10% of the international visitors that come to Mexico come from the LGBT community. And this is something that I want to highlight, because I think it's important that in some areas of Mexico, specifically in some cities, especially the resort cities or the historical cities, a great deal of promotion is now being made to attract this type of tourism. I think that that's very important. It, of course, enhances the visibility of the community. It legitimizes the different activities of the sector, be it hotels, restaurants, resorts, and all sorts of activities, you name it. And it also gives a chance to many organizations that are promoting the inflow of tourists to play an important role in that sense. And I know that, for example, here in India, this is also something that is being done to some extent still in a very incipient way, but I think it's important. I want to highlight, there's here, for example, a good friend of mine that heads an organization called Serene Journeys, which precisely does that, which is attract the members of the LGBT community to come and visit India. And this is, again, this is something that is being done quite a bit in Mexico in different cities. So overall, I think the message is, and I think that it's something that it gives us an instrument for the promotion in general of our rights, of the presence of the LGBT community, is that if nothing else, it just makes good economic sense to provide, to promote the inclusion, to expand the rights and the presence of the LGBT community in different parts of or in different sectors of our economy, participation in the corporate world and other areas and fields of economic activity in our countries, because what we're doing is something that will not only benefit our community, but will have a larger benefit for society as a whole. Thank you very much.
Hi, namaskar everyone. Thank you so much for that beautiful panel, to each and every one of you. Lee, I have to tell you that I actually quoted a lot of your research when I filed my petition for the decriminalization of Section 377. I was the only one out of the 20 batch petitions that quoted you. So thank you so much, because as you know, that led to finally the change that we desperately needed for our community. Shini, thank you so much for being always so kind and such a beautiful partner, and for also starting their education equality index, and I'm so proud of you, because that is exactly what we need right now. I'm so proud of the Tagore International kids that have done such a beautiful job with breaking barriers, and everybody here, please. I had a chance to work with them a long time ago, and since then I have our team has been supporting, and I'm so happy and proud to say that it is because of them that at our own school, which is Step by Step, we've actually started a very similar exercise. It took us 25 years, but we've got there, right? So thank you to Tagore International. I also see my hospitality school kids around here, and that are part of the audience, and I'm sure are sort of enriched with the fabulous conversations that you've had. Fabrice, thank you so much for just being so French. I don't know if the French get enough compliments for being French, and thank you for that. Thank you, and thank my husband for the 2 French touch that we've got here. The diversity quotient for today, the both of you. And Krishna, I mean, Krishna and I go back to school. So imagine 2 queer kids in school. We were fighting for the same roles in the school plays. Krishna was always way more talented. way more articulate, way smarter. But considering that it was an all-boys Catholic school, I'm so happy that I had somebody like Krishna that I could share my queerness with. We didn't ever speak about it, but we sort of understood. And there were one or two other kids in the class, but we won't name them. And I think that it is because of that that I would sort of became who I am today. And that, and of course the women in my life, which are my sisters and my mom. Thank you so much for just being you, being the mother of Queer India. I don't know why this has turned into a thank you speech and our Oscar award, but I guess, you know, I didn't get the mic today, so I'm gonna just take this opportunity. Yes. And of course, Ms. Nehanal Kidwai, and whilst FICCI, and it's a big thing that FICCI has 3 women presidents, I think they can do better. And I'm, yes, and we've got FICCI in the room also, Umaji right there. And hopefully one day we'll have an openly queer person, a trans person as the president of FICCI. And I think FICCI has really committed itself to making that happen. Thank you all for coming. I hope that this conversation reaches as many corners of our society in India now that the Supreme Court has told us that we need to convince 1 billion people instead of 5 judges. So I guess this is a start, right? And I'm hoping that you take these conversations and go back and say that, you know what, we matter, we contribute to livelihoods, we contribute to the economy, we contribute to making lives better. If the world was queer, we all know that the world would be better. But I think that we'll reach this sort of utopia where we won't have to really sit over there and talk about or try to claim space anymore, because we would be the space. But till that doesn't happen, we need to claim spaces. We need to yell our sexuality. We need to rub it in everyone's face and do it with love and kindness, which is exactly what we do here at the LaLiT. So thank you so much for that, and I think I'll let finish now. And of course, I think everybody wants brunch, so there's brunch right after this. But thank you for coming on a Monday morning. I know it's tough in Delhi, especially. It's tough for me, that's for sure. I have an allergy to mornings. But I'll stop now because otherwise it'll turn into a comedy routine and we'll have a stand-up comic. So thank you so much, guys. Thank you.